Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us again for another edition of Coffee with Corvertis. I'm Jennifer Hugo. I own and lead Corvertis, and I'm here with my fantastic teammate, Sam Lawson.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am a talent management specialist at Corvertis, and we're very excited to talk with you today.
So to kick things off, Sam, I know you've been reading a lot about work-life balance or work-life integration or whatever we're calling it now, and some ways that we may be missing a lot of people in what we're looking at. Do you want to share a little bit about what you've been reading this week?
Yeah, definitely. So this week I read an article that talked about essentially reconceptualizing work-life balance. And so the authors argued that a great deal of research that has been previously done has really focused on a more like narrow conceptualization or understanding of life. So what I mean by that is focusing primarily on individuals with families or people with dependent children, as well as a more traditional model of work. So by that, I mean, people with full-time employment who actually go into the office, but the research hasn't focused so much on what we're calling the gig economy or, the increasing prevalence of contract work and remote work. And in fact, a study that I read found that professionals and managers who live alone and who don't necessarily fit in with those traditional models of life outside of work, they actually felt that their work-life needs were seen by their employer as less legitimate than those of colleagues with children, primarily due to assumptions that their non-work time might be entirely leisure-based. Jen, do you have any thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that and seen research on that as well, that for people who don't have traditional families, that sometimes their needs, their unique needs get overlooked. Like I don't live with my husband. He actually lives in Michigan just because of our unique jobs and family situations and things. So just being open to people's, that not everyone has that traditional, nuclear family or may have unique needs. And if someone doesn't have children, they still may have a lot of other things going on in their life or different things that are important to them. And that sort of needs to be part of that work family equation.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's just so many there's so many different one-offs from those more traditional situations that we think about, like individuals on your team might be in positions where they're caring for not necessarily like a spouse or a child, but maybe like an extended relative or something like that. And so that can really impact the structure of how they utilize their time outside of the workplace. And I think some implications for like HR practitioners and leaders is just to try and better understand like the individual needs of your team members and what they value, and then try to work out something that benefits their satisfaction between their work and their personal life, but also in ways that ensure that the team performance isn't negatively impacted and that results are still able to be achieved.
Right. Getting to know your employees is so important. That connection that you have with them and understanding their unique situations. So, for example, like one thing also that's different. Some people live in the same state or near their family, that their parents and extended family. Whereas you and I, Sam, we live farther away from our families that are both in the Midwest. So that affects us as well. So I know that Sam, maybe wanting to get home for the holidays, or that you might have family events and things that are important to you, and being aware of that and checking in on those things, or even, pets, house issues, just all those life events can cause different needs and accommodations. So seeking to understand and not just asking, how are you, but asking specific questions like, how is your child's school year going, or have you thought about your plans for the summer yet, or things like that can just be so important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. Just making an effort to connect with your team on a personal level, and just really understanding anything that might be affecting the way that they spend their time outside of the workplace that is also creating some sort of strain or demand on their livelihood can really go a long way just to ensuring that your team feels valued. And then in extension of that, can definitely increase their trust and commitment and loyalty to you as a leader, and also to the organization, just that they support success both in and out of the workplace.
And that could be hard, Sam, if we're talking about paid hourly employees or gig workers or contract work, which is getting bigger now. Do you have any suggestions for how we accommodate those positions?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There has been a little bit of research done on that, but again, most of the research and just kind of what I've read is really focused more on just those traditional like full-time employment situations. But one thing I did want to bring up is that something that we've started talking about as well is kind of reframing work-life balance as work-life enhancement. And so just being able to align your actions at work and in your personal life in ways that align with your core values. And I think that probably has been a driver of why we're seeing increasing numbers of organizations really publicizing their values as companies. So it's helpful for those on the job market, whether you're applying just for maybe short-term work or contract-based work, or whether it's a full-time opportunity. It's helpful for those candidates to know whether their values align with a prospective employer. And there's actually research, as we know, to show that employer concern for work-life balance and well-being does have a positive impact on recruiting and retaining employees.
That's interesting. I have heard more from organizations lately wanting to get at that work-life enhancement, which I love that term, as opposed to balance or integration, because it focuses on making the best better and all that we can do. But some focus on, with like a realistic job preview, focusing on what you are going to offer or the things that you absolutely can't offer. So if you're a law firm that is highly competitive and deals with emergencies, you may not be able to offer flexibility, or you may expect people to work a certain number of hours. And being upfront about those work-life enhancements or what you can't offer early on in the process. Something that we do with some of our customers is offer realistic job previews that are quizzes, surveys that give you some feedback right away as a candidate on what is going to match well with what you're looking for, and where you may be different or have not be looking for stuff that's not going to be offered or that's different than what the organization does. So that the intersection of how we could combine that work-life enhancement with the hiring process is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Just any opportunity that organizations have just to publicize their values, what they prioritize, what really ties in with their culture and makes them who they are, that can be really valuable information to provide to candidates, especially, in efforts to attract candidates and then also retain those individuals if you do decide to hire them, and really can go a long way to just earning their commitment and increasing their satisfaction with work.
Right. And if there's something that you've committed to in terms of work-life enhancement or are trying to achieve, measuring that not only through conversations, but maybe pulse surveys, ongoing surveys, that could be helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks, Sam. One thing that I've been reading about, and it was part of my dissertation, so it's kind of a topic that I'm always looking to, is emotional labor. We deal a lot with the service sector, and a key element there, but really part of all of our lives. And I was actually reading today about how it intersects with our non-work life, just our daily family or personal life. Emotional labor is how we deliver the emotions that are required of our job. So all of us have emotional requirements. If you're dealing with customer service, you need to be enthusiastic or apologetic at certain times, show compassion. And in some jobs, there's compassion fatigue. I think I wrote a blog about this a few years ago. If you're in healthcare, a first responder, a lot of jobs right now, banking, financial comes to mind, where you can't help, or it's very hard you're constantly feeling compassion and empathy, and it wears you down. And how do you manage that demand on an everyday basis? So with that emotional labor, similar to what you were saying, it was kind of interesting that we have interconnected topics. With emotional labor, it spills over into our non-work life. In fact, there's a lot of research that, women with a lot of times end up doing the emotional labor as part of their relationships outside of work. And then we end up doing it more a little bit when we're in the workplace. So how does that affect things? So how we manage, this one study that I was reading, and I'll cite it below, found that how we manage the emotional demands in our non-work life definitely affects us in our work life. So if we are kind of faking it with emotional labor, we can either fake it and simply, put on a mask and try to fake what the emotional response is. So if I have cats, I don't have children. So if my cat comes to me and gives a sympathetic meow wanting attention, and I simply pretend through my tone of voice to care about her concern, and you could imagine how that maps onto spouses and children, that's called surface acting. And that can be a little bit draining if you have a spouse or a partner or a family member. You could even think about, family members with special needs, or, aging parents, where you might fall into that natural, just faking positive emotions as you're struggling through that relationship at times. That definitely spills over and causes stress and leads to doing that more on the job. The other option is, of course, that empathy, which can cause fatigue over time as well. So both strategies, there's benefits definitely to being able to empathize. There's drawbacks as well. There's drawbacks to that surface acting, but sometimes it's necessary. We talk about a lot in the service industry. You're dealing with so many different demands that you just need to check in and say, okay, I need to show, this emotion. Am I using the right tone of voice, facial expressions, those sorts of things. Sam, what are your thoughts on how like emotional labor might spill over, different things that I know you are in that literature as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think that really goes hand in hand with some of the stuff that I've been researching this week with work-life balance or work-life enhancement, however we want to frame it. But I think, in the same way, understanding the personal needs of each of your employees and just how you can better contribute to and enhance their satisfaction both in the workplace and outside of the workplace. I think the same can be said for emotional labor. So just consistently checking in with your team, especially in some of those industries that you mentioned, like healthcare, for instance, where some people may struggle to naturally convey and express some of those more empathetic emotions or demeanors, and so that can really take a toll on your well-being as well, and then how that translates into your personal life. So if you're constantly behaving or regulating your emotions in a way that isn't necessarily natural for you to do so, that can put quite a bit of strain on you. So just consistently checking in with your team and making sure that they feel supported and that they have the resources to be successful can be really powerful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on those points. And another thing that came to mind with emotional labor and is that some organizations and like nerdy IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology people will call it display rules. And that would be that, anytime you see a guest, you say hello or give a greeting, or you need to be, smiling anytime you're interacting with a guest or customer. Totally understand the reason behind that. But one thing to keep in mind is that the more employees perceive those display rules, those standards of, always saying hello and smiling and things like that, the more likely they are to do that surface acting, the faking it. And that may be necessary. I totally understand the business case for that. But over time, if people are perceiving it as a rule and something that they have to comply with, instead of I want to delight the guest or I want to take care of this patient, that's going to lead to burnout and to the faking and not to the empathizing. So if there's ways as a leader, if you're in a customer, patient, client facing role, that you can get people to want to empathize and not see it as a rule that you must comply with, that can be incredibly positive for getting people to empathize and connect and not simply fake those emotions.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think I think as a leader, and anyone who's watching this from a leadership role, just really doing your best to be approachable for your team, because in a lot of these industries and day-to-day operations, like jumping back to healthcare again as an example, that can really take a toll on your well-being and all the stressful situations that you might encounter, with patients and your day-to-day interactions with them. That can really take an emotional toll. So as a leader, being approachable, having, for lack of a better phrase, like an open door policy where you can encourage your team members to come talk with you if they've really gone through an event that's caused them a great deal of trauma. having that door open at all times can really do a lot to just ensure that their expectations are met in terms of their well-being, and then significantly reducing the risk of burnout as well.
And focusing on the purpose of it too. So way back in the day, my dissertation looked at how sense of meaning and purpose helps us mitigate some of the damage of that emotional labor. And if you can recognize that, like call out a person for something they did for a guest or for customer, client, patient, something that they did that was meaningful, the bigger impact that it has, whether that's posting letters and positive reviews from your customers or clients, sharing the good news, talking to them, debriefing with them on how what they did was important and helpful and meaningful, and helps build the company and helps them. Anything you can do to add that meaning and purpose is beneficial for driving that connection to your company and sense of meaning and purpose and just overall well-being.
Yeah, that's a really great point. That's something that I meant to bring up a couple minutes ago, is just kind of what you were saying. We're trying to frame it less about being a rule and more just, you know, how do displaying these emotions impact our success and our reputation as an organization. And then when your team members do an effective job of displaying those emotions and, you know, handling problems that come up with customers or guests or patients, you know, whatever the industry or situation might be, as a leader, recognizing those behaviors and just communicating how those impact the success of the team, that can really help reinforce those behaviors as well, and just overall satisfaction.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sam, for sharing your research on work-life enhancement. I thought we could just kind of wrap up with maybe something that's bringing us joy this week, one or two things. So I'll start because I didn't tell you about this ahead of time. So one thing that I am doing in my house that I'm at all the time is having teddy bears and stuffed animals in my windows. I have them propped up on my sofa, and I have a cat tree that is in the corner by two double windows. And I have little stuffed animals there. There's a lot of kids that are walking by with their families. And it's something I've noticed about having a teddy bear hunt across the country. There's Facebook groups and Instagram tags and things. So I am having fun with that. I may have the teddy bears engage in different tasks and maybe even pro-social behaviors that that kids can marvel at. So I'm doing that recently. Sam, what's something fun that you've done this week?
Yeah, that's great. I didn't know that was going on, but I love that idea. I personally probably don't have enough teddy bears or stuffed animals to also engage in that, but I do love that. Something that I'm doing hopefully this weekend is we've been trying to do something with our balcony outside. So something that I'm trying to do is build some type of like outdoor couch from scratch. So I have to go buy like a lot of the lumber to put that together, and I'm not necessarily much of a handyman per se when it comes to things like that, but I think I'm pretty capable of doing it. So I think it's also a really good time for people just to engage in maybe like some different hobbies or things that they haven't tried before, especially with everyone being stuck inside right now.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But of course, you know, you can still relax, and sometimes you just need that downtime. So don't feel that your hobby has to be something like creating an outdoor couch.
Sure.
Or creating teddy bear scenes.
Right.
Anything that brings you joy and relaxation right now, it is beautiful.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Well, thank you again so much. If you have any questions or if there's anything we can do to support your success, again, we're still offering no charge surveys related to the pandemic or anything that you might be experiencing right now. And we'd love to help you with anything you need regarding, you know, virtual hiring or your team and retention and coaching. We're always here for any resource that you need. So with that, we will see you next week for another Coffee with Corvertis. And thank you again so much. And we hope you have a wonderful week. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.